There is a silent, completely invisible river of raw electrical current flowing directly beneath the foundation of your home at this exact moment. It is so mathematically vast, so constantly replenishing, that it was actively utilized to power the very first global communication networks over a century and a half ago. Yet you have been systematically programmed by a synchronized network of corporate utilities and municipal building authorities to view the dirt in your backyard as nothing more than dead organic matter. You have been forced by a $60 billion energy monopoly to believe that running a single low-voltage security sensor, a specialized LED lighting array, or an off-grid automated water valve requires a complex web of highly vulnerable, hyper-expensive smart wiring completely tethered to their metered alternating current. This is a monolithic, multi-generational financial extortion operation. It is a technological cage deliberately built to blind you to the raw physics of your own property. What if the fundamental secret to generating localized, continuous, zero-emission electricity requires absolutely no solar panels, no fragile lithium-ion chemical walls, and no massive spinning wind turbines? What if the key to completely severing your low-voltage infrastructure from the grid is a mathematically perfect $5 combination of cheap industrial hardware driven violently into the common earth? I'm going to completely deconstruct the exact anatomy of a global energy suppression. I will reveal the precise scientific name of these terrestrial currents, the deep electrochemical physics of how they violently operate, and the heavily suppressed 1860s military history of their use. But you must first deeply understand the microscopic parasitic drain that the utility cartels have intentionally installed inside your smart home. The modern residential electrical grid is an instrument of supreme calculated inefficiency. The $60 billion power cartel forces you to purchase heavy, metered 120-volt alternating current to power your entire life. But look closely at the modern digital ecosystem rapidly expanding inside your house. Your internet routers, your external security cameras, your smart home motion sensors, and your hyper-efficient LED lighting systems do not run on heavy alternating current. They require tiny, highly stable trickles of low-voltage direct current. To bridge this massive gap, the industry forces you to use hundreds of tiny, hyper-inefficient step-down transformers. Every single little black box plugged into your wall, every single proprietary USB charging brick is a parasitic device. They aggressively siphon off peak-rate, highly expensive utility power, burn off massive amounts of that energy as raw, useless thermal heat, and feed a tiny, microscopic fraction of a watt to your sensors. You are actively paying premium, mathematically extortionate utility rates simply to step down their massive power into the tiny trickle you actually need. They are actively penalizing you for using efficient technology. This is a $60 billion business model catastrophe built entirely on the illusion of dependency. The cartels absolutely need you to believe that without their massive coal plants, their fragile nuclear reactors, and their millions of miles of heavy transmission lines, your localized digital infrastructure would instantly collapse into the dark ages. They are absolutely terrified of the day the public realizes that the required low-voltage direct current can be effortlessly, continuously pulled straight out of the wet earth beneath their feet, completely bypassing the utility meter forever. Subscribe and hit the bell. This channel digs exactly where the $60 billion power utility industry doesn't want us looking. We do not accept corporate hardware mandates. We mathematically dismantle them and rebuild our power grids from the ground up. To fully grasp the absolute scale of this suppression, we must abandon the sterile, hyper-connected digital world of the 21st century and return to the brutal, undeniable physics of the 1860s. As the first massive transcontinental telegraph lines were being ruthlessly carved across the rugged American frontier, the architects of early global communication faced a highly specific, civilization-altering problem. They needed to send heavy, continuous electrical pulses across thousands of miles of wire, but the primitive, highly volatile chemical glass batteries of the era constantly decayed, leaked, and required massive, expensive supply chains to replace. Operating deep in completely isolated hostile territories, a dead battery meant the total collapse of military and civilian logistics. During an intense period of hyper-experimentation, frustrated telegraph operators made an absolutely terrifying discovery that the modern utility cartels have spent over a century trying to erase from the historical record. The operators realized that if they completely disconnected their highly expensive glass chemical batteries and instead simply drove massive metal grounding rods deep into the wet earth at both ends of the telegraph line, the heavy copper wire still actively carried a highly measurable, highly stable electrical charge. They were not generating power, they were physically intercepting it. They had accidentally tapped into a massive, naturally occurring planetary electrical grid. The suppressed scientific terminology they are absolutely terrified you will discover is the subterranean telluric current, actively harvested through the undeniable electrochemical physics of a localized Earth battery. The modern energy cartel desperately prays you never learn the vocabulary of galvanic soil dynamics. They absolutely need you to look at the ground and see dirt, rather than a massive, naturally occurring, hyperdense chemical electrolyte. The mechanism of an Earth battery is so mathematically simple, so brutally efficient, that it completely obliterates the concept of metered low-voltage power. The soil beneath your feet is not dead matter. It is a highly active chemical matrix consisting of complex minerals, heavy metallic salts, and raw groundwater. This soil matrix possesses a massive cationic exchange capacity. When you take two highly dissimilar, totally cheap metals, specifically a solid rod of highly conductive copper and a heavily galvanized steel rod coated in raw zinc, and drive them deeply into the earth a few feet apart, you create a massive, violently active electrochemical reaction. The raw moisture in the dirt acts as the perfect unmetered electrolyte. The highly reactive zinc rod becomes a heavily sacrificing anode, slowly shedding its electrons into the subterranean matrix. The solid copper rod becomes a powerful cathode, actively pulling those violently free electrons out of the dirt. When you connect a copper wire between the tops of those two rods above ground, you forcefully bridge the galvanic gap. The free electrons violently rush through your wire to complete the circuit, generating a highly stable, completely continuous flow of pure direct current electricity. Let us transition into a rigorous mathematical breakdown, because the precise numbers associated with this geological suppression are completely devastating to the modern corporate narrative. We must aggressively calculate the true, multi-generational economic efficiency using a highly specific, voiceover-friendly mathematical formula. We will definitively call this the telluric extraction potential. The exact formula is V equals E1 minus E2 minus IR. That is, the usable continuous voltage equals the absolute galvanic differential between your chosen heavy metals minus the internal resistance of your specific soil matrix. Let us aggressively examine the heavily subsidized, industry-standard smart home model. To effectively wire an entire off-grid property with low-voltage landscape lighting, perimeter security sensors, and continuous environmental monitoring, the cartel requires you to purchase a highly complex, centrally wired smart hub. They force you to run hundreds of feet of expensive, heavily insulated outdoor copper wire from a massive central parasitic step-down transformer bolted to the side of your house. Your total capital expenditure for the proprietary hardware, the massive spools of wiring, and the heavily gated corporate installation will easily exceed $6,000. And because that entire system is directly tied to the primary alternating current grid, it completely dies the exact second the centralized power plant fails. You have spent $6,000 on a system that is mathematically guaranteed to fail when you need it most. Now let us mathematically calculate the exact undeniable cost of the decentralized, highly localized Earth battery solution. Consider the hyper-specific, highly documented case of a retired signals intelligence officer operating a heavily fortified, entirely off-grid property deep in the iron-rich, dense red clay of northern Georgia. Disgusted by the predatory, hyperinflated quotes from localized security integrators, he completely abandoned the smart grid entirely. He refused to run a single foot of central wire. Instead, he visited a common agricultural supply store and purchased 50 pieces of completely unrefined heavy-gauge copper plumbing pipe and 50 pieces of heavy, industrially galvanized steel rebar. His total material cost was approximately $250, equating to exactly $5 for each localized battery pair. At every single location on his massive property where he required a highly sensitive security motion detector or a continuous LED perimeter marker, he did not run a central wire. He simply drove one piece of copper and one piece of galvanized steel deep into the heavy Georgia clay, spacing them exactly 4 feet apart. Using the brutal, undeniable physics of the telluric current, each $5 paired rod instantly generated 0.89 continuous volts of raw electrical pressure. Because the heavy clay soil was naturally acidic and highly saturated with dense mineral moisture, the internal resistance was practically non-existent. To achieve the precise mathematical threshold required to actively run his 3-volt electronic sensors, he simply chained 4 of these Earth battery pairs together in a localized series circuit directly right there in the dirt beneath the sensor, The voltage instantly compounded. The isolated, highly primitive dirt grid immediately output a rock-steady 3.5 volts of pure, totally unmetered direct current. Under the heavy, continuous rain of the Georgia forest, the internal soil matrix became even more highly conductive. The galvanic reaction intensified. For a localized capital investment of exactly $20 in raw hardware store metal per sensor location, this engineer secured absolute, indestructible, totally invisible localized power. His completely decentralized perimeter grid contains 0 central transformers. It requires absolutely no utility connection. It operates completely independently of the sun. His mathematical economic efficiency over a 20-year period is an absolute staggering fraction of the corporate model. He achieved complete, undeniable energy sovereignty using the exact electrochemical physics that powered the early telegraph lines. This is exactly why the modern energy cartels rely so incredibly heavily on the sophisticated illusion of digital centralization. They absolutely need you to believe that off-grid power requires highly complex, hyper-fragile solar arrays and toxic lithium chemistry. If the general public firmly realizes that you can power your entire localized digital ecosystem, your smart sensors, and your microelectronics simply by violently driving a $5 piece of copper and zinc into the wet soil of a common flower bed, the entire massive financial foundation of the low-voltage step-down industry instantly disintegrates. The exact geometry of the Telluric Earth battery is the ultimate unstoppable weapon against centralized grid reliance. It is raw, brutal, subterranean reality that cannot possibly be metered, cannot be deliberately shut off during a rolling blackout, and cannot be hidden forever behind a wall of highly complex smart home marketing. The true revolution in localized, entirely off-grid power will not be achieved by purchasing a sleeker, more expensive internet-connected transformer from a multi-billion-dollar megacorporation. It will be achieved by dragging heavy, unrefined metals out of the industrial hardware aisles, aggressively driving them deep into the chemical matrix of the Earth, and actively weaponizing the exact same galvanic mathematics the early pioneers used to conquer the communications frontier. We must completely abandon the fragility of the smart grid and return to the massive, undeniable stability of the localized soil loop. Subscribe and hit the bell, because our complete deconstruction of the corporate energy matrix is far from over. If you think the active suppression of subterranean telluric physics is a profound violation of the public trust, wait until you see exactly what we uncover next. We are going to permanently tear open the engineering archives and expose how the artificial inflation of dedicated wind and hydro generator prices is a massive scam. You will learn exactly how a highly specific mathematical alteration using cheap permanent magnets can turn a $10 discarded washing machine motor into a grid-crushing, storm-proof generator capable of powering an entire off-grid home.